10 years ago, on a brutal winter night in South Dakota, a 19-year-old girl vanished right after her shift ended, disappearing without leaving a single trace, leaving her family in confusion and unbearable pain. Authorities suspected a stalker had been lurking around the store where she worked, but they could never identify him, and the scant clues quickly sent the investigation into a dead end. From the snow-covered parking lot, they only found a few vague signs, footprints blending together, a shadowy figure that appeared and then vanished, but no solid evidence to follow. And through all those years, Aurora's family, especially her mother, never gave up hope. She clung to every tiny tip, every phone call, every faint sign that Aurora might still be out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Then one day, when a young investigator reopened the case file, a detail that had seemed meaningless, one tiny object everyone had overlooked for an entire decade, suddenly became the breakthrough that completely flipped the investigation in a way no one saw coming. A detail that unlocked a chain of shocking truths, pointing straight into the dark corner of someone no one had ever suspected. Before we dive deep into this chilling case, let me know where you're watching from, and if you love mystery stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The winter of 2004 draped Rapid City, South Dakota, in a cold, gray shroud. Snow fell steadily, thick layers blanketing the roads and swallowing every sound. Inside Gwen Ashford's small office supply store, Aurora Linwood had just finished her last shift of the day. She took off her apron, grabbed her purse, slipped on her bright-colored coat, and wrapped her wool scarf again before giving Gwen a tired but kind smile. When Aurora stepped outside, the door closed behind her, leaving her alone with the skin-cutting cold of the night. The parking lot in front of the store was lost in a blur of white snow. Streetlights flickered weakly, reflecting off the snow in patchy halos. Aurora walked step by step through the silent emptiness, her breath mixing into the frosty air. Farther back, behind the snow-covered cars, a dark shape moved, just fast enough that Aurora couldn't be sure she hadn't imagined it. She paused for half a second, turned toward the darkness. Silence. Only the wind howling softly across the metal roof. Even though she saw nothing, an unnameable feeling crawled up her spine. Aurora pulled her collar tighter and walked faster. The drive home felt longer than usual. Aurora turned on the radio, but the faint music did nothing to chase away the growing unease in her chest. As she neared the neighborhood, she turned off her headlights and stopped a few houses short, as if thinking something over. The snow was falling heavier now, piling on her shoulders as she stepped out of the car. Light from nearby windows stretched her shadow long across the snow. Aurora lowered her head and hurried toward the house. That was the last moment anyone ever saw her. When Aurora didn't come home at her usual time, Caleb Linwood tried to stay calm. At first he told himself the snow might have slowed traffic, or she'd stopped somewhere. But when her phone rang and rang with no answer, worry started tightening around his chest. Caleb threw on his coat, ran outside calling Aurora's name down the driveway, shining his flashlight into every dark corner of the yard. Snow had covered everything, erasing any sign. He called Lydia Cross, Aurora's best friend, but Lydia had no idea where she was. Caleb drove to Gwen's store. The door was locked, the parking lot was empty, no fresh footprints, nothing to hold on to. When he searched the familiar road Aurora always took, he and the family shouted her name into the freezing night, sweeping flashlights over trees and shadowy roadsides. Still nothing, no scarf, no skid marks in the snow, nothing left behind. By then fear was no longer a passing feeling, it had become a heavy weight in the air. Caleb stood in the yard, snow soaking his clothes, hands shaking. He wasn't sure if it was the cold or a terrible premonition he was trying to push away. Finally, with nothing left to hold on to, Caleb pulled out his phone. His fingers were stiff from the cold, but he still dialed 9. In the Rapid City Police Department's night duty room, the only sounds were pages turning and wind rattling the window. Officer Weller, on night shift, was writing up a minor crash when the emergency phone rang. He picked up, his voice dropping into the calm professional tone. Rapid City Police Department, Officer Weller speaking. On the other end was a man's trembling voice, breaking into sobs, every word sounding like it was being dragged out by panic. "Please, my wife, Aurora Linwood, she's missing. No one can find her. Weller instantly went serious. He'd heard that desperate tone a few times in his career, and it never meant anything good. He quickly jotted notes into the duty log, told the man to stay calm, confirmed Aurora's last known location, and sent an urgent signal to the night investigation team. "We've got the report. Units are on the way now. Keep your phone close, we'll call you back." When the call ended, Weller said nothing more. He just hit the internal alert and imped on the duty room signal lights. A sign this was no routine case. Less than 10 minutes later, the investigation unit's SUV pulled up in front of Gwen Ashford's store. Rowan Hale stepped out first, thick coat dusted with fresh snow. Maren Kessler followed right behind, hair tied back under a wool hat, eyes sharp the way they always were at a fresh scene. They'd been briefed a woman missing, last seen leaving this store tonight, never made it home, no contact. Rowan slammed the car door shut, the metallic sound cutting through the icy wind. "Set up the perimeter," he told a waiting patrol officer. Yellow tape went up instantly around the entire parking lot. Under the patrol car lights, the snow glittered like countless tiny sparks, making the scene feel both still and suspicious. Rowan opened his notebook and wrote his first observations. The snow surface was mostly smooth, barely disturbed, meaning the area saw little foot traffic. That was crucial. Any disruption would stand out. Maren went straight to the lot, where the weak streetlight tried to cut through the falling snow. She knelt, scooped up a thin layer of snow, letting the ice melt against her glove. "Hiss. Fresh fall," she said quietly. "If anything happened here, we'll see it." And they did. Near the middle of the lot, Rowan spotted an area where the snow wasn't flat anymore. It was pressed down, warped into curving grooves, running off to one side. Not footprints, not tire tracks. A chaotic disturbance caused by sudden abnormal movement, like a brief struggle. "We've got something here," Rowan called Maren over. Maren crouched, using a ruler to measure the depth of each groove. Heavy force applied here, someone resisted, or was dragged. Wind whipped through the lot, sending chills that made the weight of the place sink in even while they stood there. They followed the direction the mark spread, a stretch of dragged snow, faint, but enough to show something, or someone, had been moved. Not walking, not an animal. The surface was scored in long streaks, as if something had fallen and then been pulled a few feet. "No way," she walked away, Maren said firmly. Another set of hands was here, near the edge of the lot. Maren's flashlight stopped on a small object half buried in the snow. A corner of dark fabric poked out under a thin layer of ice. She signaled Rowan. It was a wool scarf. Not torn, no blood, no obvious evidence, but it had no business lying there on a silent winter night. Was she wearing a scarf when she left? Rowan asked Gwen Ashford, who stood shivering behind the tape. I think so. She always wrapped one when it was this cold." Maren marked the spot but didn't collect it yet. Right now the priority was keeping the scene untouched. They moved closer to the store entrance. Next to the thick snow over the walkway, Rowan noticed a single footprint, pointing the opposite direction from where Aurora would have walked to her car. The print led toward the side of the building, then disappeared where strong wind had blown the thin snow away. "Not hers," Rowan said. "Aurora would have gone straight to her car, not around a dark corner like that." Maren followed the print with her eyes, then looked at Rowan. Her expression said everything. This wasn't someone just vanishing on her own. Not a ride with a friend. Not running away. Not an accident. Everything pointed to one possibility. A second person had been here, and their presence wasn't random. When the forensics team arrived, one look told them how serious it was. The entire lot was photographed from every angle. Disturbed snow areas were measured and flagged. The scarf was collected with sterile tools. Every piece of data was preserved before more snow could cover the tracks. Under the flashing lights of patrol cars and the suffocating silence of the snowy night, one thing became clear. The scene doesn't lie, and it showed that Aurora Linwood had not left this place willingly. As soon as the techs started collecting evidence in the parking lot, Rowan knew any snow traces could vanish in hours, so he immediately shifted some manpower to reconstructing Aurora's movements. The only thing that could tell them what happened before the scene turned into a blank slate. And right then, the team received the first piece of data from the duty desk. The recording of Caleb Linwood's missing person call, his voice shaking with panic. That detail made Rowan grip the case file tight. When a husband calls, sounding that broken, you know you're dealing with something far from ordinary. Rowan and Marin went back inside Gwen Ashford's store to pull all the interior camera footage. Gwen led them to the small back room where an old monitor still flickered. Marin sat down and started rewinding, adjusting brightness to see the door clearly. There was Aurora's slim figure, bright coat, purse held neatly in front. She smiled at Gwen, then stepped outside. The glass door closed behind her. Everything looked normal right up to the last second she was in frame. But when Marin slowed the footage of Aurora leaving, a blurry movement appeared at the edge of the screen. "Rowan," she said quietly. He leaned in and focused. A dark figure, face and gender unclear, appeared just seconds after Aurora, standing exactly where she had walked. The person didn't enter the store or do anything else. They simply moved off frame in the exact direction Aurora had gone. The timing was too perfect to ignore, and it made the little back room feel suddenly airless. They didn't stop at the store camera. Rowan opened his laptop, took detailed notes, and started requesting footage from every street camera in the area. Marin stayed with him, hitting every possible location. The gas station 2 blocks away, the convenience store at the intersection, and the old traffic light pole that still had a working camera. At the gas station, the extracted footage showed Aurora's car passing at normal speed, but just seconds later, a dark mass entered the frame. Vehicle type and plate were unreadable because of the heavy snow, but one thing was clear: that car was moving slower than normal, as if watching or waiting for something ahead. Everything was blurry but loaded with suggestion. From the traffic light camera they pieced together the next part of her route. Aurora's headlights turning onto the residential street she took every day, a short road full of dark corners, dead spots where snow blocked the streetlights, and a long brick wall behind an abandoned industrial lot. Rowan looked at the map and felt the hidden danger Aurora had apparently never worried about. When they combined all the camera data, the timeline sharpened. Aurora left the store as light snow started. Seconds later, a shadowy figure followed. 5 minutes after that, her car appeared on a street camera. Shortly afterward, a dark vehicle tailed her, not hiding but not too close either. A tight sequence of movements too precise to be coincidence. Based on Aurora's usual route, confirmed by both Gwen and Caleb, Rowan circled 3 possible intercept points: the stretch with the dark brick wall, the curve behind the empty warehouses, and the short parking area right before the neighborhood. But when matched with the parking lot scene where they found drag marks in the scarf, the third possibility stood out. Aurora hadn't been approached on the road. She was attacked the moment she stepped out of her car, right where the snow was disturbed. To be certain, Rowan called in the K9 unit to track Aurora's final steps. The dog Bristle quickly picked up Aurora's scent from a clothing sample brought from home and led the team around the narrow paths behind the parking lot. Bristle followed the exact faint drag trail Rowan had spotted from the disturbed area between 2 rows of snow-covered cars, around to the empty lot behind the store. The leash went taut. Bristle sniffed hard at the compressed snow, then suddenly surged forward in one clear direction. But just a few dozen meters later, the dog stopped dead. He circled, sniffed repeatedly, then looked straight up at Rowan, as if to say he could go no farther. The handler confirmed, "Scent ends here." Like the victim was lifted off the ground, or put into a vehicle. That stopping point matched perfectly with the area where the street camera had caught the dark vehicle. A picture was forming, thin layers of snow, fitting together into a clear shape. Aurora had been followed from the store, approached in the parking lot, dragged to a hidden spot behind the building, and from there taken away, most likely by vehicle. When Rowan and Marin got back to their car, they looked at the screen showing the stitched-together video segments. Every one of Aurora's movements, every shadow trailing her, every faint mark on the snow, all pointing to a single scenario. Aurora Linwood didn't disappear because she got lost. She didn't disappear because of an accident. She didn't disappear because she chose to leave her life behind. She was stalked. She was intercepted. And someone had carefully planned every step she took before she was ripped out of this world. Finished building was still glowing on the laptop screen when a new report came in from the neighborhood canvas team. A woman living directly across from Gwen Ashford's store insisted she had seen a suspicious person during the exact window when Aurora disappeared. The name, Eleanor Vance, immediately grabbed both detectives' attention. Cases like this rarely came with direct eyewitnesses. If Mrs. Vance truly saw something, her statement could become the first piece that actually described this second figure caught on the store's camera. Rowan and Marin arrived at her apartment on a windy morning, the snow scraping against the windows like winter's long sigh. The apartment was warm and tidy. Mrs. Eleanor's soft silver hair, petite frame, invited them to the table. Her expression held not only worry but a firm conviction that what she had seen the night before mattered. "You're here about the man standing next to the dark-colored car, aren't you?" she said before Rowan could even ask, as if she had been ready for hours. Rowan nodded, and she began, eyes drifting to the window where she had stood the previous evening. "I saw a man standing beside an old SUV," she said slowly, recreating every detail. "Dark color, boxy shape, looked like an older sport utility model. It had been there at least a few minutes before I noticed." Marin tilted her head slightly. "What was he doing, ma'am?" "Nothing." Mrs. Eleanor lightly clasped her hands. "He was perfectly still, like a shadow, thick wrinkled coat, hood pulled low, covering almost his entire face. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel he was watching the store." That description made Rowan lean in. "Watching how?" "Like someone waiting for a particular person to come out," she answered without hesitation. "His body was angled slightly forward. No cigarette, no phone, no pacing. Just staring toward Gwen's store." Her voice was steady, but a faint shiver ran through it, as if merely repeating it unsettled her. Marin continued, "Did you get a look at his face?" "No." The hood was too low, and the streetlight shadow swallowed the whole upper half of him. I could only make out his build, taller than average. Definitely over 6 feet, broad shoulders. He stood with a slight forward stoop, like someone used to carrying heavy loads, or with a bad back. Rowan scribbled nonstop. The description matched the figure from the store camera. Tall, dark clothing, slow movements, keeping distance. Another detail caught their interest just as much. "You mentioned the SUV made a strange noise?" Mrs. Eleanor nodded firmly. "Yeah, a faint metallic rattling, like a loose or rusted exhaust. Not loud, but distinctive. I heard it clearly when the engine turned over, and the car vibrated." Rowan and Marin exchanged a glance. That detail was gold. Such a sound was rare and memorable to anyone living near roads or garages. It would also help identify the vehicle on blurry traffic cams. "Did you see him enter the store or move around the area?" Rowan asked. "No. He never left his spot," she stated. "He'd look at the store, then glance toward the parking lot exit. Like he was timing when someone would appear." The room fell quiet for a beat. Everything Mrs. Eleanor described lined up perfectly with the timeline. Aurora steps out. The figure appears seconds later, then follows her. Rowan asked the final question. "Do you know when he left?" She shook her head, eyes lowering. "I stepped away from the window for just a few minutes to get water. When I came back, both he and the SUV were gone. No headlights, no engine sound, like the wind had taken them." That sent a chill straight to the bottom of Rowan's lung. The man hadn't just appeared the moment Aurora left the store. He had vanished within the exact window when Aurora's signal went dead. As they left the apartment, Marin said to Mrs. Eleanor with genuine gratitude, "Your statement is worth far more than you think. It will help us narrow the suspect pool dramatically." Mrs. Eleanor looked at them, sad but resolute. "I just hope you find that girl." I didn't like the way that man stood in the snow, like he was waiting for something bad to happen. Rowan and Marin stepped out with a clearer feeling than ever before. The man beside the SUV hadn't been there by coincidence. He was the direct link to Aurora Linwood's disappearance. Eleanor's statement was still echoing in their minds, when Rowan and Marin shifted focus to something more concrete than any description, physical evidence from the scene. Everything was brought into the forensic lab that same afternoon, where harsh white lights left no detail hidden. The first item the technicians processed was the wool scarf recovered near the disturbed snow patch. After drying and removing melted snow, it was placed under magnification. The scarf's surface looked ordinary, but when tweezers separated the outer fibers, something made everyone freeze. Dark brown synthetic fibers that did not belong to the scarf. They were snagged in the wool, as if violently rubbed off in one brief but forceful moment. Structural analysis revealed heavy-duty, abrasion-resistant synthetic with a waterproof coating. Material typical of work jackets, not everyday or fashion outerwear. Aurora owned nothing like it. This allowed Rowan to picture close contact. The perpetrator in a thick, dark brown jacket, bending over, or restraining Aurora close enough for patches of his jacket fabric to transfer. As soon as the scarf was logged, the next item came up. A small branch picked up near the rear parking lot path. It had been just a snow-covered blur at first, but under UV light, a tiny dark brown speck appeared. Dried blood. Too small for the naked eye, but enough for testing. DNA results came back fast. The blood was Aurora. It wasn't a deliberate cut or major injury. The spatter shape indicated it dropped while the body was in motion, likely from being pushed, dragged, or brushing the branch during a struggle. This confirmed Aurora had suffered physical force in that spot, and the branch had accidentally recorded the moment. With biology finished, the team moved to movement-related evidence. Footwear. The silicone cast of the print was laid out. The deep square tread pattern stood out sharply under the lights. Marin recognized it immediately. Not athletic shoes, not casual footwear. These were work boots, anti-slip, used in industrial settings, construction sites, warehouses, or anywhere with slick surfaces. More telling, the tread pattern was uncommon. This type was sold only in specialty tool supply stores, not mass retail. The sole size was large, at least men's, 11 or bigger, for a tall, heavy man. Rowan stood behind Marin, looked at the cast, and underlined in his notebook. Perp is manual labor type, not office guy. That was traceable information. Circle the stores that carry this boot, and the suspect list shrinks fast. The final piece was the tire impression recovered near where the canine lost the scent. Snow had blurred most of it, but the silicone cast still preserved several key grooves. Technicians built a 3D model on screen. Rowan and Marin watched as the pattern emerged. Not the SUV Mrs. Eleanor saw in front of the store, but late 1990s pickup truck tires. Even more telling, the left side groove was visibly misaligned, showing uneven wear or prior impact damage. That perfectly matched Mrs. Eleanor's metallic rattling, common in old vehicles with loose exhausts or chassis issues. These were not premium tires, but budget work truck rubber used by mechanics, welders, heavy delivery drivers, or local haulers. It ruled out someone driving a new personal vehicle, and further solidified the profile. A big man doing hard physical work, driving an old pickup, wearing work gear head to toe. When all evidence was compiled into one report, the perpetrator portrait became sharper than any witness sketch. A large male, rare work boots, heavy dark brown work jacket, of the type worn only by outdoor manual laborers, drives a late 90s pickup with misaligned, rattling exhaust. Strong enough to subdue Aurora quickly, familiar enough with the area to approach her the instant she was alone. Rowan stared at the final summary, and underlined 3 lines. Work jacket, work boots, old pickup. 3 uncommon details that would narrow the suspect pool to a handful of men. And for the first time since Aurora vanished, the team felt something real, however fragile, forward direction. The evidence-based perpetrator sketch was barely dry when a new name surfaced from the canvas list. A worker at an industrial complex only 2 blocks from Gwen Ashford's store. The man had been seen in the area during the exact disappearance window, and crucially, he regularly wore a dark brown work jacket and boots, very similar to the scene cast. With those overlaps, Rowan and Marin couldn't ignore him. They brought the man in for questioning. His name was Tobin Marks, around 30, sturdy build, keyless wrists of a heavy labor guy. He looked genuinely confused when he entered the room, unaware he was under suspicion. Rowan watched his reactions while Marin opened her notebook. "Tobin, we need to clarify a few things," Rowan said calmly, giving nothing away. "You work the night shift at the complex?" "Yeah, 3rd shift," Tobin nodded. "Usually get off around 10. Marin noted the time. It matched when Aurora left the store. They had to dig deeper. "We've been told you often walk past Gwen's store around that same time," Rowan continued. "True?" Tobin swallowed and nodded again. "I stop at the convenience store next door for snacks before heading home. But what's this about? I don't have anything to do with that missing girl." Rowan didn't answer yet, switched topics. "The boots you're wearing today, you wear that type regularly?" Tobin glanced down. Yeah, bought them because they're good on greasy floors." Marin shot Rowan a quick look. "Exact boot type. but details matter. Rowan asked Tobin to surrender his oldest pair still in use. Techs took them for comparison. Results came back soon. Same brand and style, but wear pattern completely different. No match to the snow impression. The first red flag wavered. "Do you own an older pickup truck?" Rowan asked next. Tobin looked surprised. "No. I drive a 206 hatchback. Never even owned a pickup." Marin marked, "Vehicle mismatch." For certainty, they took a DNA swab. Results a few hours later confirmed what Rowan's gut had started telling him. No match to anything from the scene. Tobin Marks was officially cleared, but the interview wasn't a total waste. Just as Rowan closed the file to remove him from suspicion, the confused man suddenly remembered something. He hesitated, then spoke. "Actually, there's something I think you should know." Rowan looked up. "Go ahead. I don't know if it's related, but the several days before the girl went missing, I saw a brown pickup parked near Gwen's store right when she got off work." The room went dead silent. Marin's pen froze mid-stroke. "Brown?" she asked slowly. "Yeah." Tobin nodded. "Old pickup. Paint chipped on the right side. First time I figured someone making a delivery, but then it kept showing up, always same spot right by the parking lot fence." "Did you see the driver?" Rowan asked, voice low. "Not his face." Tobin's. "He'd sit inside with the lights off. Window cracked just a bit. Hard to see, but I remember one thing clearly." He paused, as if deciding whether to continue. "The driver always wore a dark brown jacket, not like mine, thicker, stiffer, the kind guys in freight or cold storage wear." Marin leaned forward. "Anything else about the truck?" Tobin frowned, thinking, "Yeah. When it started up, I heard that metal rattling sound. Real distinct, like a loose muffler or chassis banging. Definitely not a new truck." A chill ran up Rowan's spine. It was the exact sound Mrs. Eleanor had described. The match was uncanny. "Which days did you see that pickup?" Rowan pressed. "At least 3 days before she disappeared," Tobin answered. "And the night Aurora went missing. I saw it peel out fast. Didn't think much of it then, but now," he swallowed hard. Something felt really off. When Tobin left, Rowan stared at the fresh notes. Brown pickup, multiple prior appearances, driver in dark brown jacket, metallic rattle, waiting for Aurora's shift to end. Marin spoke softly, voicing both their thoughts. That guy wasn't there by chance. He'd been stalking Aurora for days. And so, from one false suspect came a new, solid lead. One that brought them closer than ever to the shadow behind Aurora Linwood's disappearance. The clue provided by Tobin Marks opened up an entirely new investigative direction, but at the same time forced Rowan and Marin to expand their sweep to everyone who had appeared around the shopping complex in the days before Aurora vanished. Just as they were filtering the list, a patrol unit reported that a group of teenagers who often hung out near the adjacent convenience store had been briefly questioned and had something noteworthy to say. So Rowan and Marin immediately headed to the parking lot behind the convenience store, the spot where the boys still gathered most evenings. The group consisted of 4 kids, looking grubby in that typical teenage way that didn't care much about the North Dakota cold. When they saw the police approaching, they tensed up a little, but one of them, a boy named Wyatt, stepped forward and spoke first. "We didn't do anything, but we did see something the night she went missing." Rowan kept his voice calm. "We just want to hear what you saw. Nobody's a suspect unless there's a clear reason." Wyatt nodded, then glanced at his friends, as if double-checking. "We were here that night, just hanging out. Then, there was a truck that took off really fast." "What kind of truck?" Marin asked, deliberately keeping her tone neutral so she wouldn't lead him. Wyatt frowned, thinking back. "Old pickup, dark color. I'm not sure exactly what tore, because the snow was coming down hard. I just know it peeled out like it had just pulled away from a parking spot. Way too fast. Like it was running from something." Rowan tilted his head. "Did you get a look at the driver?" "Not his face. We were standing behind the food truck, blocked by the corner. Just heard the engine roar. Then it disappeared down the road into the residential area." Another kid chimed in. "I saw the tailgate was dented a little. Not a lot, but definitely not a new truck." Rowan jotted it down quickly. The information matched the tire track analysis and the description of a metallic rattling sound, even though the kid had no idea about any of that. Marin followed up. "Do any of you remember the license plate?" They all shook their heads at once. Wyatt leaned forward, hands on his knees, and sighed. Snow was too thick, plus the truck was flying, and the taillights were blurry anyway. Rowan understood the limitations: young witnesses, obstructed view, bad weather. Everything combined made precise observation nearly impossible. Still, one other detail had caught Marin's attention at the far end of the lot, where the patrol unit had temporarily cordoned off an area. One of the boys had blood on his jacket the night of the incident. The report mentioned someone with blood on their clothes, Marin said. Who was? A blond kid in the back raised his hand, looking embarrassed. Me, but it's got nothing to do with anything, I swear. Rowan's tone turned serious. Tell us exactly what happened. I wiped out on my bike on the way here, he said, his face turning red. Slid out on the snow, knee slammed the ground. Blood dripped onto my jacket a little. I still have the bike at home. My dad yelled at me for hours because I bent the rim. Rowan glanced at the fresh scab on the kid's knee. It was a long scrape that lined up perfectly with the timeline. The lab had already tested the blood on the jacket. DNA didn't match Aurora. Everything checked out. No reason to doubt him further. After clearing the blood issue, Marin steered the conversation back to the fleeing truck. Did you hear anything from the truck? Any unusual sound? She asked. Wyatt frowned, then raised his hand to mimic the motion. It was shaking hard, like the engine was louder than normal. There was also this rattling, quiet, but like metal hitting metal. Rowan slowly set his pen down. This was the third time in 24 hours they'd heard the same description of a metallic noise. 3 independent witnesses, no connection between them, yet all heard the same sound from the same type of vehicle, and all of them were around the area where Aurora disappeared. Have you ever seen that truck before? Rowan asked, not expecting much. Wyatt shook his head. Not sure, we don't really pay attention. Lots of vehicles come through here, but that night it was different, fast, and like it was in a hurry. Marin asked one last question. Anything else that stood out more? A paint scratch, a bumper sticker, anything distinctive? Another kid spoke up. The driver's side rear door looked old. Paint was peeling a bit, but I only caught a quick glance. The information wasn't enough to narrow anything down, but it confirmed what Rowan and Marin already suspected. This pickup wasn't some random vehicle. It had shown up repeatedly, tied to at least 2 critical moments in Aurora's case. Yet no one had managed to read the plate or identify the driver. When the teenagers were allowed to leave, Rowan and Marin stayed behind in the parking lot, the cold wind whipping their faces like thin blades. The statements pieced together into a blurry but consistent picture. An old pickup, frantic behavior, vanishing right when Aurora disappeared. Even though the kids couldn't provide identifying details, their accounts reinforced the one thing investigators needed most: that truck wasn't a coincidence. It was the central link. And despite the new lead, they were still no closer to the man hiding behind the wheel. The teenagers' statements, while strengthening suspicion about the pickup, ultimately didn't deliver what Rowan and Marin truly needed: a concrete direction. 3 witnesses, 3 slightly different but equally vague descriptions. No face, no plate, no detail sharp enough to turn into evidence. They only knew there was an old truck, a distinctive metallic rattle, and a shadowy figure in a heavy coat. But in an investigation seems like is never enough. The deeper they dug and the more people they asked, the more they got the same answers. I think I saw a dark truck. It might have parked here a couple times. The driver looked like he was wearing a hood. Nothing solid enough to enter the file as a confirmed lead. In too many snowy nights, every image blurred and human memory distorted it further. Physical evidence, the thing the whole team had once believed was the key, started betraying their hopes too. The wool scarf with its unusual fibers had sparked hope, but no database was deep enough to match that synthetic thread to a manufacturer list. That style of coat was sold widely across more than 10 northern states. No store kept buyer name. Places that sold that kind of work jacket didn't track customers. What seemed unique turned out to be far more common than they wanted. The boot prints weren't much better. Even though the style was less common, the market at the time still had dozens of nearly identical models made by different companies and sold across multiple states. Investigators had contacted work gear stores and farm supply warehouses around Rapid City, but no one remembered a customer with that size and style. We sell hundreds of pairs a month, one owner said. Can't remember who bought. The tire tracks, which had seemed the most distinctive element, only yielded one conclusion: old pickup, possibly minor collision damage. But the Midwest was full of trucks like that. Hundreds, maybe thousands. No camera had clear enough footage to read a plate in the snowstorm, and traffic light videos only showed a dark distorted blur sliding past. The scariest part wasn't the lack of leads, it was that every lead faded at the same time. Rowan and Maren returned to the parking lot where Aurora vanished countless times, hoping the harsh weather might reveal something they'd missed. But fresh snow kept covering everything, erasing every groove, every footprint. Each visit left the scene whiter, colder, and more lifeless than the last. Caleb Linwood still came to the station every week, carrying fragile hope for any news. But every time he stepped into the waiting room, Rowan's eyes told him nothing had changed. Aurora's mother called regularly too, always starting with the exact same question: has anyone found anything new? And every time Maren gave the same answer: we're still working as hard as we can. But the truth was, even though they had done everything possible, the case hadn't moved an inch. No Aurora, no specific suspect, no identified vehicle, no DNA match, no witness who saw a clear face. Just a ghostly truck in the snow and a nameless shadow. By early 2005, with snow still deep and the north wind still blowing through the bare trees, the department held an internal meeting to assess progress. Files were stacked on the conference table: evidence reports, witness statements, crime scene photos. Rowan looked at the pile and felt the thing every investigator dreads admitting: the case had no foothold left to move forward. The lead investigator concluded in a heavy voice: we're suspending active investigation until new evidence surfaces. One short line, but it poured ice water over the entire team's spirit. Aurora Linwood's file was moved to pending status, waiting for new information. Both Rowan and Maren tried to fight it, but every argument circled back to the avenues they'd already tried and failed. There were no other paths. In June 2005, after nearly a year of zero progress, the Aurora Linwood case was officially labeled a cold case. Her name was added to the state's long-term missing persons list, a list that grew every year with new names and very few ever removed. On the day the status was updated, Rowan stood in the records room, hand resting on the light brown folder labeled Aurora. He didn't close it right away. For a moment he just stood there silently, staring at the case number as if forcing himself to remember that somewhere in this windy city, a 19-year-old girl had vanished, and no one knew what really happened to her. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing every trace, but inside them the void the case left behind was colder than any Rapid City winter. Aurora Linwood never came home, and her case slowly sank into the darkness of a cold case, waiting year after year for an answer that never came. A decade had passed since Aurora Linwood's file was moved to cold case status, and like most frozen cases, time gradually covered it with a layer of dust and forgetting, not because anyone meant to forget, but because hundreds of new cases kept piling onto the desks of the Rapid City Police Department. The investigators who had worked the Aurora case had moved on, promoted, transferred, or left the job entirely. But one person still carried that box of files in her mind like an unpaid debt: Maren Kessler. By 2014, Maren was a seasoned detective, far more experienced than the woman she'd been into. One early fall evening, while reviewing old cases to prepare for a strategy meeting, her eyes accidentally stopped on a folder label, Aurora Linwood. It was mixed in with dozens of other cold, lifeless files, but for Maren that name had never faded. She pulled the folder off the shelf, wiped the thin layer of dust from the cover, and opened it, and in that moment she knew she couldn't let this case stay buried any longer. The old reports lay flat, the typed letters slightly faded, the crime scene photos had yellowed a little, but every detail, the wool scarf, the boot prints, the drag marks in the snow, came back to Maren as clearly as if she'd seen them yesterday. What had dead-ended the case back then was the lack of comparative DNA and the lack of technology sensitive enough to separate mixed samples. But a week earlier, Maren had attended a statewide forensics conference where experts presented a new technology: mixed sample extraction, a technique for separating mixed DNA from complex evidence, including fabric, skin cells, touch DNA, or samples contaminated by multiple sources. This technology could isolate components that used to be labeled too noisy or unanalyzable. For most detectives it was just another advance among many in forensic science, For Marin it felt like a puzzle piece, sliding perfectly into place. The image of Aurora's wool scarf flashed instantly into her mind. In 2004, the lab had only been able to confirm it was Aurora's scarf, and detect a few dark brown fibers that didn't match her coat. And that was it. No usable DNA profile. No way to separate the microscopic cells clinging to those fibers. Now mixed sample extraction could do exactly that. Marin set the entire folder on her desk, her fingers unconsciously brushing the edge, as if physical contact reminded her this was no longer a dead case. If there's a way to retest the evidence, she told herself, then this is the only time to do it. The next day Marin went straight to the forensics lab. When she walked in, Dr. Dalton, the forensic scientist who had worked with her for years, looked at her in surprise. "Don't see you bringing cold case files in here very often," he said half-jokingly. Marin placed the sealed evidence bag containing the wool scarf on the metal table. "I want to rerun this sample, with mixed sample extraction." Dalton raised an eyebrow. "That's the 2004 file, right? Aurora Linwood." For a few seconds Dalton was quiet. The Aurora case had shaken the local investigative community, and left a lingering regret over a case that probably could have been solved if the technology back then had been better. He opened the bag and placed the scarf under the examination light. "Realistically," Dalton began, "there's a good chance the sample has degraded, but mixed sample extraction is more powerful than anything we had before. If there are still skin cells, epithelial cells, sweat, anything from whoever touched that scarf, we can get a full DNA profile." Marin finished. Dalton nodded, his eyes lighting up with the same focus she remembered from when he was younger. "All right, we'll give it one shot. If this technology can do what we couldn't do 10 years ago, this will be a game changer." Marin signed the request form for re-examination of evidence, writing each line with absolute care. When she put the pen down after the final signature, she felt something strange, like simply bringing this one small piece of evidence back to life was pulling Aurora's case out of the icy realm of the forgotten. The scarf was taken to the special processing room. The new generation machines started running: micro-DNA separation chambers, enzyme filtration units, multi-source amplification systems. Each fiber was placed under a gentle stream of heated ionized air to release any cells still clinging to it. While waiting for the initial results, Marin leaned against the glass wall watching Dalton work. She knew this technique was no guarantee. Plenty of old cases still failed because the samples were too degraded, or completely destroyed by the environment. But with Aurora she felt something different, an inexplicable belief that if any case deserved to be reopened, it was this one. And if there was ever a chance to find the perpetrator after 10 years of darkness, that chance was starting right here, in this cold white room, amid the low hum of machines and a wool scarf, left behind on a snowy night. And preliminary results from the lab landed on Marin's desk on a gray bitter morning, just 2 days after Aurora's wool scarf entered the new mixed sample extraction process. The message from Dr. Dalton was only 3 words: "We have a signal." In that instant, Marin knew the thing they had chased for 10 years and never caught had finally appeared. She hurried to the lab. Dalton stood in front of the screen, displaying the amplified DNA sequence in sharp peaks. He didn't need to say more. The graph spoke for itself. A single male DNA profile had been cleanly separated from Aurora's scarf. The new technology had done what every method in 2004 had failed to do. "This is the only foreign DNA on the scarf," Dalton explained. "Not a mixture like before, a complete unambiguous profile." Marin stared at the pale green marker bars glowing on the screen. This was no longer the blurry data that had disappointed them for years. This was a clear, undeniable biological fingerprint. Upload it to the National TOTUS database, and they would know the identity of the man who touched Aurora's scarf, and most likely had direct contact with her in the final seconds before she vanished. Dalton entered the sequence. A progress bar crawled forward, each percentage point ticking like a heartbeat hammering in Marin's chest. Every second felt heavy. She had watched dozens, maybe hundreds of these searches before, but this was the first time in 10 years she felt hope strong enough that her hands unconsciously clenched the edge of the cold steel table. The bar turned solid green. A chime sounded, and right there on the screen, in red letters every cold case investigator dreams of seeing, "Match found." Dalton zoomed in on the retrieved record. A name appeared, cold and sharp as a blade sliding from its sheath: Silas Merrick, born 1979. Last known address Box Elder, South Dakota. No criminal record. Biometric profile in the database from a civil matter years earlier. Marin felt as if someone had shoved ice straight into her lungs. The name wasn't unfamiliar. It had appeared on a very preliminary list in 2004 but was never considered a serious suspect. Back then Silas had no direct link to Aurora, no witness mentions, no sightings in the area. Only one minor detail had flagged him for routine screening. He had briefly worked at an auto shop near where Aurora disappeared. "We skimmed past him once, didn't we?" Dalton asked. Marin nodded, a chill crawling up her spine. "Yeah, nothing at the time put him on the radar. No reason to dig deeper. Until now," Dalton corrected. Marin looked at the DNA chart again, a complete genetic sequence left on Aurora's scarf 10 years ago. No mixture, no guesswork. Silas Merrick's trace was right there at the last place she was touched. No doubt left. She printed the match report and carried the pages out like they were alive. At her desk she pulled the old file, flipped to Silas's page. When he was younger he bounced between odd jobs, warehouse, auto garages, machine shop, all heavy labor environments that matched the fabric fibers and boot prints in the original profile. Though he had no convictions, he once appeared in civil records for threatening a coworker after a minor dispute. The incident wasn't serious enough to prosecute, but his biometric sample was entered into the system. Without that small event, his DNA would never have been in any database. Marin reorganized the documents, stapled the new DNA match to the front, and closed the Aurora Linwood file with a finality she hadn't felt in 10 years. The lid on that cold box had finally cracked open. She called Rowan immediately. He arrived minutes later. Marin said nothing, just slid the printout across the desk. Rowan scanned it once, then again to be sure his eyes weren't lying. His gaze darkened instantly, not from fear but from understanding what this meant. A case frozen for 10 years had just come back to life. The perpetrator was no longer a shadow in the snow. He had a name, a face, an old address, a work history that matched every description. "Silas Merrick," Rowan repeated, voice dropping low. "We start over with him." Marin nodded. No more doubt, no more guess. From one lone strand of DNA pulled from a 10-year-old scarf, the entire Aurora Linwood investigation had turned, and the path now led straight to Silas Merrick. The man never looked it hard enough, yet the one who left the most crucial trace the night Aurora disappeared. The investigation was no longer frozen. It had just begun again, and this time they had something they never had 10 years ago: incontrovertible evidence. Information on Silas Merrick expanded the moment Marin and Rowan reopened his file. Pages that had once been glanced at and dismissed for lack of significance were now spread under the harsh lights of the secure conference room. The deeper they read, the more something felt off. Like Silas had always stood at the very edge of the case, only they hadn't looked closely enough to see him. Silas Merrick was born and raised in Box Elder, a small town just east of Rapid City. Residents' history showed he had lived almost his entire life within a few dozen miles of where Aurora vanished. Neighbors described him as quiet, reclusive to the point many didn't even know what he did for work. He changed jobs frequently, staying a few months before disappearing without explanation. That made him the kind of person who could slip through a crowd and vanish in a single winter. Scattered notes in the file, things not deemed important in 2004, now stood out. Local police had once warned Silas for stalking behavior toward 2 women in Box Elder. There wasn't enough evidence for charges, but both victims described the same pattern. He stood at a distance, motionless, just watching. No words, no approach, but he always showed up around closing time, or when they walked home. Back then his silence was treated as ordinary harassment. To Marin and Rowan now, it felt eerily similar to how Eleanor had described the hooded man the night Aurora disappeared. They kept digging into vehicle and movement records. Maintenance logs from a Rapid City garage showed Silas's late 90s pickup, color unconfirmed, due to faded records, appearing repeatedly downtown in late. 2 repair receipts weeks apart proved he regularly drove the route near Aurora's workplace. In a small city like Rapid City, that frequency was anything but coincidence. Marin pulled the 2004 traffic map and marked Aurora's usual route home from work. Overlaying Silas's known locations produced an intersection right where Aurora vanished. Data points that had floated unconnected years ago now formed a chillingly logical chain. Rowan uncovered another detail in employment records. Silas had an unexplained week-long absence from work immediately after Aurora disappeared. No request for leave, no notice, just gone. In 2004 that alone wasn't enough to raise flags. Now combined with the travel patterns and stalking complaints, it became a critical piece. Most telling was a single line in the old interview log Marin found. Silas Merrick, unable to provide specific alibi, stated he was home alone. No proof, no witnesses, no corroboration. A gaping hole that hadn't warranted follow-up then, but now glowed like a warning beacon. Everything painted a very different picture. A reclusive man with a history of watching women, frequently in the area where Aurora worked, driving her nightly route, and without an alibi for the critical window. Marin set the entire file on the table and stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't one detail that made him suspicious, it was the whole. Every scattered point in Silas Merrick's life suddenly connected, as if he had always stood just behind the fog of Aurora's case, waiting for enough time to pass before he could be clearly seen, and now nothing hid him anymore. The file information instantly transformed Silas Merrick from a forgotten name into a top surveillance target. The moment Marin and Rowan agreed on the new direction, they deployed a covert team and placed Silas under 24/7 microscopic watch without his knowledge. The tale began quietly, but within hours, Silas's behavior made the whole team feel he lived as if someone were already following him. From the window of his small box elder house, Silas only appeared before full daylight or after dark. Each time he left, he scanned both sides of the street longer than normal before climbing into his old pickup. His routes had no pattern yet showed clear signs of counter-surveillance, sudden turns, unnecessary detours, occasional stops in empty lots, where he sat motionless for minutes, testing whether any vehicle stayed behind him. The team logged everything. None of it was enough to arrest him for, but it was enough to confirm their gut. Silas was not innocent. Another thing Marin noticed was how he handled trash. Every time he took it out he wore thin gloves, placed items in separate bags, tied them tightly, then set the bins at the curb. He did it with excessive care, as if he believed a single cigarette butt could be used against him. That caution only made his actions more suspicious. Rowan signaled the collection team, "Only take what he throws away. No contact, no noise." That night, as cold wind swept the dark row of houses in Box Elder, one team member quietly approached Silas's bins after he went back inside. No lock-picking, no disturbance, just the bags Silas had just discarded. Inside, a half-used paper coffee cup, 2 dark cigarette butts, a few tissues with saliva stains, and a plastic straw. Everything was sealed on site and rushed to the lab. Marin was present when the lab opened the evidence box. Dalton gloved up and removed each item. "If his mouth touched any of this," he said, "we'll know immediately." They didn't have to wait long. DNA extracted from the cup rim, and cigarette filters came back terrifyingly fast. Not just the same type, but an exact match to the male profile pulled from Aurora's scarf. Zero discrepancy, zero chance of error. The perfect match silenced the room for several seconds. Rowan braced both hands on the table, leaning in to read the report one last time. Marin felt ice slide down her spine, because this was no longer conjecture, no longer instinct, no longer circumstantial pieces. Silas Merrick had left his trace on an item tied to the moment Aurora vanished, and now he had unknowingly handed them another piece of irrefutable evidence in the most ordinary trash. Rowan straightened, voice firm. "Time to get the search warrant." Marin called and forwarded everything to the prosecutor's office. Approval came faster than ever seen in a cold case. A 100% DNA match had turned a dead-end investigation into an arrow aimed at a single suspect. Outside the conference room window, South Dakota's night was thick and cold, exactly like the night Aurora disappeared. But this time the darkness could no longer hide Silas. He had been seen, and they were about to walk into his house. The door gave way under specialized tools in just a few seconds, and the whole place was steeped in a stale, moldy smell, the unmistakable odor of spaces rarely touched by human hands. Rowan signaled the sector assignments. Marin and 2 technicians went straight to the living room, where the first flashlight beam swept across a wall-mounted coat hook. Hanging there silent was a thick, dark brown coat, its outer fabric showing slight wear in a pattern that matched the fibers previously found on Aurora's wool scarf. The technician sealed the coat without a word, but everyone understood. This was no longer a vague suspicion. The match in material and color made it the strongest piece of evidence since the case had been reopened. Moving deeper inside, they found in a wooden drawer by the window a black folding knife with dark brown dried streaks on the steel blade. Rowan lifted it with evidence tongs. The light made the dried blood stand out sharper. This wasn't something Silas could easily explain away. The knife was sealed immediately, and one glance was enough for Marin to know. This blade was sharp enough, compact enough to inflict wounds quickly and discreetly. The perfect choice for someone who wanted to control another person in the dark. Preliminary analysis confirmed the blood was not Silas's, but they didn't yet need to know whose it was. Its very presence here was already a major red flag. The most important room was at the end of the hallway. The door was closed but unlocked, and when they pushed it open, no one on the team spoke. Flashlight beams swept the walls and stopped at the same moment on two things: a hammer and photographs carefully arranged on hanging lines. A homemade dark room, the air still faintly chemical from developing solution. Marin stepped closer, a chill running down her spine. The photographs were not landscapes or art. They were of Aurora, taken secretly from a distance, from hidden angles. The store parking lot, the walkway to her home, the street corner where she often stopped at a red light. All were printed large and hung in neat rows like pieces of a long-standing obsession. One showed Aurora bending to lock the store door. One showed her waiting by her car. One was taken from behind framing her wool scarf. In none of them did Aurora look toward the lens, because she never knew someone was watching her from the darkness. Next to them, pinned to the wall, was a series of handwritten notes. The scrawled but legible entries recorded times: off work 8, day off Tuesday, usually takes back path if raining. Rowan stared at the board in silence, his eyes darkening. He stalked her for months, if not longer, he said quietly, as if afraid to disturb the heavy air in the room. Marin didn't answer. She was bending down to examine another cardboard box under the table. Inside were dozens of undeveloped film rolls, each labeled with dates in ballpoint pen. Methodical, meticulous, obsessive. Every detail showed Silas had not acted on impulse, but with patience, possibly planning long before Aurora disappeared. A technician ran in, holding up a nylon evidence bag. In the closet, multiple sets of work clothes, rare sole pattern matches what was found at the scene. Everything was starting to line up. The brown coat, the folding knife with blood, secret photos of Aurora, notes on her work schedule, work clothes matching the original description. The small room in the old house, in Box Elder, had spoken what Silas had hidden for 10 years. Aurora Linwood was not a random victim. She had been watched, observed, treated as a target he had devoted time, obsession and preparation to approach. Rowan clenched his fists and let out one short sentence that carried the weight of handcuffs clicking shut. No doubt left. We've got the right man. With every piece of evidence from Silas's house collected and sealed, only one step remained to complete the first phase of the investigation: bring him under control. Rowan and Marin refused to give Silas another second outside their sight, especially after seeing the dark room filled with his obsession. U.S. Marshals were called in, coordinating with Rapid City PD, preparing for a discreet but absolutely secure arrest. That morning the sky was solid gray, cold wind sweeping through Box Elder as if trying to strip all color from the small street where Silas lived. The task force split into 3 approach vectors, every footfall light and synchronized like a single calculated breath. Rowan held position behind the entry team, eyes locked on the front window where the thin curtain had just fluttered. Silas was definitely awake inside. As the marshals reached the porch, a sudden clatter came from within, objects banging together, frantic and panicked. No further signal was needed. The entry team moved instantly. The front door exploded inward with a sharp crack that echoed in the frigid air. Silas stood in the middle of the living room, startled but not frozen. He was holding his phone, slamming it against the floor as if trying to destroy something still in its memory. A marshal barked, "Drop the phone. Hands on your head." Silas stumbled backward, lunging toward the kitchen as if looking for an escape route. He yanked open a cabinet, grabbing for a metal object, knife or tool, it didn't matter. But before he could raise it, 2 officers were on him. One precise tackle took his balance. Silas fought wildly, flailing arms, jerking shoulders, trying to throw off the restraining force. He let out guttural, almost meaningless sounds, as if 10 years of pent-up desperation were erupting at once. Rowan rushed in to assist, pinning Silas's arm while a marshal snapped cold steel cuffs onto his wrists. He still thrashed, fingernails scraping the floor for one last shred of freedom. It was useless. Silas's entire body was locked down by 3 officers, and within seconds he could no longer move. "Silas Merrick, you are under arrest," a marshal declared, voice fine. Silas exhaled raggedly, breath coming in distorted gasps, eyes bloodshot as he stared around as if unable to believe it had come to this. They dragged him outside. The clink of handcuffs in the cold air sounded like the closing of a door he should have shut long ago. Outside, the U.S. Marshal's SUV was waiting. Silas was shoved into the back seat, head bowed, but his hate-filled eyes still darted back and forth, searching for anything that might save him from the law. When the door slammed shut, Rowan stood on the curb watching the vehicle pull away. It wasn't the relief he'd felt in other cases. What he felt now was heavier, deeper, because they had just arrested not only a suspect, but probably the man who had tied himself to Aurora, in the most twisted way possible. Marin sat in the front passenger seat of the following PD vehicle. Her gaze never left Silas's shadowy silhouette through the tinted glass. At last, after 10 years of chasing a nameless figure in the snowy dark, that figure now had a concrete form, cuffed, restrained, and on his way to Rapid City to face what he had done. No more run, no more shadow in the parking lot, no more hiding behind a hooded jacket or the window of an old pickup. Silas Merrick was in custody, and the investigation was about to enter the phase no one on the team had dared believe they would reach, a statement from the very man who had haunted Aurora Linwood that winter. In the Rapid City PD interrogation room, Silas Merrick sat motionless on the metal chair, wrists still marked from the cuffs. The harsh white light made his face look paler and more strained than usual. Marin and Rowan entered and sat across from him. They didn't need to open any files. Everything they knew about him was enough to begin the conversation they had waited 10 years for. Silas spoke first, voice hoarse from hours of silence. "I know why you brought me here," he said with a faint smirk. "I'm not denying. I used to follow her." The admission made the room feel as if the air had been sucked out. Rowan locked eyes with him, not letting Silas shift the topic. "Why follow her?" Silas shrugged, tilting his head as if the question were trivial. "I was just interested. She was nice to everyone. I only watched from a distance. Never hurt anyone." Marin waited a few seconds, then said, "You stalked Aurora for months. Kept notes on her work hours. Took secret photos. That's not interest." Silas pressed his lips together, irritation clear. Still he stayed defensive. "I know it looks bad, but I never touched her. Never took her. I don't know anything about her disappearance." That was when he changed tactics, and the twist began to take shape. Silas stared down at the table for a long moment, then suddenly looked up. There was someone else. The room went dead silent. Rowan repeated slowly, "Someone else? What do you mean?" Silas leaned back in his chair as if he had just played a hidden card. "I wasn't the only one watching Aurora. There was a guy showed up a few times in the parking lot. I saw him from a distance. He watched her the same way I did. Some nights I even thought he was following me." Marin noted it down but kept her voice calm. "Name, description, license plate." Silas shook his head. "No name, bigger than me, had a beard, drove an old dark-colored car. He's the one you should be arresting." Rowan leaned forward, voice low. "Silas, you're inventing a ghost, and you know it." Silas gave a dry laugh. "Believe me or don't, but I didn't make Aurora disappear." That confidence didn't last long. As Rowan and Marin pressed into the details, Silas kept contradicting himself. Marin asked, "You said you only watched from a distance, never approached, yet one photo shows you just a few steps from Aurora. How do you explain that?" Silas blinked rapidly, caught off guard. That day I just wanted to see better. She didn't notice me." Rowan jumped in immediately. "Then why does a note on your wall say 902 standing close?" She turned around. Silas clenched his fists, struggling to stay composed. "I wrote it to remember. It didn't mean anything." "But that note contradicts what you just said," Marin concluded. As the interrogation continued, they circled back to the other man. Rowan asked, "You said he had a beard, first bigger than you, then same height. Have you noticed your description changes every time we ask?" Silas ground his teeth, confusion showing. "Maybe I misremembered. It's been 10 years. Marin quietly asked one final question. "So how can you misremember the appearance of someone stalking Aurora, but be more certain he existed than that you yourself did it?" Silas had no answer. His eyes darted as if searching for another excuse. But this time there was nothing left to grasp. In that tense silence, Silas unwittingly revealed one more damaging detail. I knew Aurora usually took the back path when it was cold. That night she probably did. Marin's head snapped up. You just said that night. How do you know the night she vanished was cold? And that she took the back path? That information was never released. Silas's eyes widened, his face freezing as if the air had been ripped from his lungs. He realized he had just said something an innocent person could not possibly know. Rowan looked at him, voice low. Silas, you just told us more than any other statement could. In that stifling room, the truth no longer lay in Silas's denials. It lay in the words he could not control. And from that moment, the entire team knew. The second man Silas had invented was his own shadow. Right after the tense interrogation with Silas, before the air in the investigation room had even begun to settle, Rowan's desk phone rang. The urgent tone from the other end made him shoot to his feet, exchanging a look with Marin. Something serious had just happened, and it hadn't come from the interrogation room. A middle-aged man's voice came through, breathing hard as if he'd just run a long distance. We just found remains in Badlands National Park. Personal items, they might belong to Aurora Linwood. The news hit like a cold blade slicing through the silence. Within minutes, Marin and Rowan were on the road into the Badlands, where wind and sand had carved the rock formations over thousands of years into sharp, desolate shapes that looked like they belonged to another world. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape, and the man who had called it in, Bo Riker, a local hunter, was standing beside his pickup, his face pale from still shaking. He explained that he'd been tracking deer when he spotted something white poking out of a crack in the rock to the west. He thought it was just animal bones, but when he got closer he knew instantly he'd found something far more horrific. Beneath the broken ledge, the remains lay mixed with dry grass and sand, the clothing rotted to barely recognizable scraps of fabric. The forensic examiner crouched down, carefully studying every remaining trait. Rowan and Marin stood a few steps back, saying nothing, but their silence was proof that what they had long suspected had finally become real. A technician gently lifted a small object found beside the bones of the left wrist. A ring. Pale green stone, thin and delicate. Marin recognized it immediately. Aurora always wore that ring, a gift from her mother. In the missing person file, the ring was explicitly listed as something Aurora never took off. Now it lay on the Badlands ground, amid desert wind and flesh-cutting sand, like a quiet confirmation of its owner's identity. The medical examiner approached with the initial report. Based on the decomposition of the bones and remaining tissue, the time of death was clear. Aurora had died the very night she vanished in 2000. Her life ended quickly, likely from a single heavy blow to the head, evidence of which was found on one of the vertebrae. There were no signs she had tried to run or been dragged far. The killer brought her here, left the body in a concealed spot and walked away forever. When a strong gust swept through, thin layers of sand covered the investigator's shoes, and Marin looked around the area. Treacherous terrain, no trails, no footprints, no one had set foot here in years. This was not a place anyone stumbled upon. The killer either knew it or had taken the time to find the perfect spot to hide Aurora from the world. He didn't take her far, the examiner continued, but he took her somewhere no one would have reason to look. Marin swallowed the lump in her throat, not from pain, but because Aurora had finally been found, yet the price was the irreversible confirmation that she had left this world. That snowy night, Rowan stood quietly staring at the high ledge where Aurora had been hidden for a decade. The body wasn't just another piece of evidence, it was the end of hope, yet also the key that unlocked the final phase of the investigation. The Badlands wind howled through the rock crevices like an ancient lament, and from this moment forward, the Aurora Linwood case was officially no longer a missing person case. It had become a homicide. The discovery of Aurora's body immediately pushed the entire file into the prosecution phase, and the Silas Merrick case quickly became the center of attention at the Pennington County Courthouse. On the first day of trial, the courtroom was packed with media, Rapid City residents, and families who had followed Aurora's disappearance for the past 10 years. Silas was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his face blank but his eyes restless, no longer the sullen, evasive figure from the interrogation room. He sat in the defendant's chair, hands clenched as if trying to hold on to some shred of control he knew was gone. The prosecutor stepped to the podium and wasted no time on emotion or tragedy. She went straight to the case structure. The scattered pieces collected over 10 years had finally formed a complete picture. On the large screen she presented each part, each piece of data, each item of evidence, in an order so sharp it was chilling. It began with the DNA extracted from the wool scarf, the first piece that put Silas in the suspect circle. Then the sample from trash he'd thrown away that contained biological traces, matching perfectly. Then his movements in 2004, aligning with the route where Aurora was stopped. Items found in his home, a jacket with matching brown fibers, a folding knife bearing blood not his own, and most damning, the dark room with covert photos of Aurora. The prosecutor did present in an emotionally overwhelming style, but like a finely honed blade, one precise cut after another. Every piece of data was placed exactly where it was needed, nothing extra, nothing missing, and when assembled, it formed an irrefutable conclusion. Silas had stalked Aurora, approached her, and taken her to the Badlands the night she disappeared. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man with a calm voice, tried to rebuild the second-person story Silas had hinted at during interrogation. They offered the theory of a stranger appearing in the parking lot, witness statements about another vehicle, the possibility that Silas was merely an obsessed stalker but not the killer. They tried to plant in the jury's mind the idea that another shadow might exist, someone no one had ever identified, but the prosecution did not let that story survive beyond a single round of arguments. They countered with technical data and emotion. Silas's location data from that night placed him in the area with no alibi. When the defense asked about the bearded man, the prosecutor presented a chart analyzing Silas's statement, highlighting every contradiction he had created himself. When the defense argued about another vehicle, the prosecutor showed a map comparing tire tracks at the Badlands scene. Only one type matched, the late 90s pickup Silas owned. And the final blow, the prosecutor displayed a behavioral comparison chart, covert photos, notes of shift-ending times, routes, weather the night she vanished, even the detail that Aurora usually took the back way when it was cold, information never released to the public, yet Silas had unconsciously mentioned it during interrogation. The defense had no way to turn it around. The second person crumbled completely under the light of forensic evidence. When closing arguments ended, the courtroom fell silent. The jury left for deliberations. No one spoke, no one moved much, only the scratch of pens and rustle of paper. Less than 3 hours later they returned. The foreperson stood and spoke clearly. We find the defendant Silas Merrick guilty, murder in the first degree. There was no cheering, no applause, just silence, thick silence from a community that had finally heard what they had waited a decade to hear. Silas did not react dramatically as people expected. He simply closed his eyes for a second, as if accepting something that had arrived sooner than he was ready for. But when the sentence was read, life imprisonment without parole, he opened his eyes and looked around the courtroom as if searching for anything that could still save him from that outcome. There was nothing. No one stood with him. No one believed in the second person except him. The officer cuffed his hands and led him through the cold, narrow corridor. Light from the high windows fell across his face, making it look pallid, stripped of any trace of the man who once hid in the shadows. No more power, no more control, no more shadow he thought would protect him. As sentencing day ended, the investigation team simply watched Silas walk through the door behind the courtroom. Marin said softly, almost a sigh, "It's finally over." Rowan nodded slightly. Over for him. But for Aurora, there's still one more thing. And that would be told in the next part, when the Rapid City community had to face the aftermath of the case that had haunted them for 10 years. When the courtroom door closed behind Silas Merrick, Rapid City entered a strange quiet, not the silence of fear from 2004, but the silence of a community that had finally been given the truth, after 10 years, swallowed by darkness. News of the verdict spread quickly through the streets, diners, schools, and churches. People spoke in low voices, but everyone's eyes carried the same mix of emotions: horror, relief, and a grief that had no name. On local stations, footage from the time Aurora disappeared played on repeat. Images of the young woman leaving the store on that snowy night, the empty parking lot, the search appeals, all of it resurfaced once more. But this time, there was no spiraling despair. The truth had been established. The killer had been convicted. The disappearance that had haunted Rapid City for a decade finally had an answer. A memorial service for Aurora Linwood was held the week after the verdict, in the small square beside Wilson Park. Snow fell lightly, enough to signal winter's approach, but not enough to hide the hundreds of candles lining the walkway. Old friends, former co-workers, neighbors and strangers who had followed the case year after year, all were there. Many brought photos of Aurora, some laid flowers, others simply stood in silence, hands clasped against the biting cold, as if the warmth of solidarity could ease the void her death had left. The Linwood family stood in the front row. Caleb, who had made that desperate call to police in 2004, now had far more gray in his hair. When he placed his hand on his candle, Marin and Rowan stood quietly nearby, saying nothing. There was no need. For the first time in 10 years, Caleb's eyes no longer carried panic. The pain and irreparable loss remained, but alongside them was closure, an ending, an answer, a peace the family once thought they would never reach. When the MC read Aurora's name, the entire park fell into absolute silence. Every gaze turned toward the flickering candle. There were no loud sobs, no heartbroken screams, just long heavy breaths, as if the whole city were exhaling in unison after 10 years of holding its breath. Marin watched the scene and knew that even though the killer had been convicted, this case would never leave Rapid City's memory. It had changed how people looked at winter darkness, how they paused in empty parking lots late at night, how they protected their children, how they trusted their own instinct. Aurora Linwood was gone, but her story had become a reminder. Sometimes the truth takes 10 years to rise from beneath the ice. As the ceremony ended, wind gusted through the rows of candles, making a few flicker but none go out. Those small lights stood firm in the cold, like Aurora herself, a quiet yet enduring presence in the hearts of the entire community. The Aurora Linwood case was closed. The cold case was over, but the scar it left on Rapid City, and on everyone who had spent 10 years searching for the truth, would remain long after the snow melted. The story of Aurora Linwood is not just a fictional investigation. It clearly reflects issues that Americans today still face every day: personal safety, recognizing stalking behavior, the power of community, and the critical role of technology in solving crime. Aurora was silently stalked for months without realizing it. Silas Merrick noted her shift times, took covert photos and followed her routes, behaviors that could happen today in any major city from New York to Denver or Seattle. In reality, according to the National Stalking Resource Center, 1 in 6 women in the U.S. has experienced serious stalking, and many cases begin with small signs that are easy to overlook. The real lessons from this story are: first, trust your instinct. Aurora had a moment of unease when she saw a figure in the dark parking lot, a seemingly tiny detail that was actually the first signal of danger. In America, where many people work late shifts or travel in low-light conditions, staying alert, scanning surroundings, and letting loved ones know your schedule are vitally important. Second, the story shows the importance of community. The courage of Hunter Bo Riker in reporting the remains he found, and the Linwood family's refusal to give up, reflect community vigilance, watching out for and caring about one another, a core value in American life. It was the community that helped bring justice for Aurora. Finally, technology, from mixed DNA extraction to movement tracking, reminds us that evidence never truly disappears, and criminals cannot hide forever. This is advice for American society today. Do not hesitate to report, keep records, and involve law enforcement. The more data that is preserved, the higher the chance a case can be solved, even 10 or 20 years later. Aurora's story reminds us that vigilance, community spirit, and faith in justice are what help Americans live more safely in an increasingly complex society. Thank you for following the Aurora Linwood story. If you found it meaningful, please subscribe to the channel to continue joining us on journeys to unravel cases that seemed lost to time. See you in the next video, where even the smallest clue can reveal a much larger truth.